there comes a moment when the mind stops turning back toward what broke it. The noise dulls. The need to explain dissolves. The story that once consumed every thought fades into background static. That is when forward motion begins. The past still breathes somewhere, but it no longer commands. The eyes stop searching for closure in memories that have already testified their truth. What was done has been seen. What was lost has been learned. When the heart finally accepts that not everyone deserves revisiting, peace begins to take root. No grand speech, no dramatic ending, just stillness. The kind of stillness that frightens those who depended on your reaction. You've stopped looking back, not out of denial, but design. The road ahead demanded both hands on the wheel, and you gave it. Now, the rear view holds ghosts that wave, but none you owe a return. The people who once fed on your confusion sense the change before you announce it. They feel it in your absence. Your silence used to belong to them, a pause they could fill with guilt, excuses, or control. But now it belongs to no one. It stretches like a border around your new self. You don't check who crosses it because none can. The heart that once sought understanding has become a fortress, not guarded by anger, but by indifference. You no longer crave resolution from those who caused the storm. You've realized storms explain themselves eventually. That realization ends the chase. Growth often looks like distance, but it's simply alignment. Every step forward pulls you closer to truth and further from noise. And behind you, the past calls, but you no longer answer. The sound no longer reaches where you've climbed. You've stopped looking back, because the summit was never meant to share space with regret. The world has a strange respect for those who stop chasing what broke them. It doesn't give applause, but it adjusts. People start to look at you differently. The same ones who once underestimated your silence now struggle to read it. They can't tell if you've forgiven them or forgotten them, and that mystery keeps them restless. That's power, the kind that needs no declaration. When you stopped looking back, you reclaimed your authority. Because looking back is a negotiation with ghosts, and you've ended all contracts with the dead. Every morning feels lighter, because the past no longer steals weight from the present. The faces that once demanded attention fade into outlines. The memories that once felt sharp now fold into lessons. You no longer need revenge or closure or validation. You found something rarer: neutrality. A steady pulse that moves only forward, never circling the same wound twice. At first, letting go felt like betrayal. The mind clung to what was familiar, even if it was painful. It replayed conversations, rewrote endings, invented apologies that would never come. But repetition breeds awakening. After a while, even pain grows tired of itself. The same story loses flavor when healing starts whispering louder. You didn't wake up one day suddenly cured. You simply grew exhausted from bleeding for the same cause. Slowly, the energy once spent on proving your worth turned into the art of preserving it. That's how the shift happened. Not in one moment, but across many small ones. You stopped replying to provocations, stopped explaining your piece, stopped reopening doors just to prove you could walk away again. You learned that freedom is not the absence of memory. It's the mastery of direction. You finally understood that peace doesn't demand permission. It demands distance. Those who still live in your past mistake your silence for weakness. They think you've moved on too easily, but they don't see what it took to stand that still. The quiet is not emptiness, it's evolution. The soul stops asking for fairness once it sees how life self-corrects. You no longer analyze who lied, who stayed, who left. The truth has already done its work. The need to reframe it has expired. That's what unnerves them most, your lack of interest. Indifference wounds the ego more deeply than anger ever could. You stopped looking back, and that decision dismantled their control. Because without reaction, their power evaporates. You've outgrown the emotional gravity that once kept you circling around them. What used to hold you now feels weightless. Time didn't heal you. Awareness did. You realize some people don't deserve confrontation, they deserve distance. And distance, once chosen, rewrites everything. Moving forward became addictive once you felt how light it was. The quiet hours that used to ache began to feel sacred. You started filling them with creation, purpose, presence. The silence that once echoed now hums with direction. You stopped seeking understanding from those who never spoke your language. Instead, you built your own dialect of calm. Progress replaced closure. There's something powerful about not explaining your piece. It makes the past irrelevant, the future magnetic. You stopped looking back because the horizon finally offered something real. Growth became your form of revenge, but not in malice, in mastery. Every step forward is a subtle declaration that you were never destroyed, only refined. The more you create, the more their absence becomes proof, not pain. That's the reward of moving on correctly. You stop competing with ghosts and start dancing with destiny. Memory doesn't disappear, it just learns its place. The past still visits sometimes, dressed in old music or familiar faces, but it no longer stays. You nod to it, the way one greets a lesson already learned. There's no bitterness left, only recognition. That's how you know you've healed, when remembering no longer costs energy. You stopped looking back, not because the view was ugly, but because the path ahead finally felt like home. There's a stillness to that kind of progress, a quiet dominance that speaks louder than explanation. People start to sense it in you. They call it mystery, but it's discipline. They call it detachment, but it's freedom. You carry your calm like armor now. Nothing to prove, nothing to chase. Just momentum, clean, precise, unstoppable. The eyes face forward, the heart faces truth, and the past, for once, stays behind you where it belongs. Every story has a moment when the main character stops searching for the villain and realizes the story was never about revenge. It was about evolution. You reached that point the moment you stopped looking back. All the chaos that once defined you became data. Every betrayal turned into calibration. What once felt like loss became direction. You've grown into someone the past could not recognize. That's why it no longer pulls you. It has nothing left to offer that you haven't already transcended. Your silence became a weapon of refinement, not rebellion. You walk with the same calm that once made them uneasy, only now it serves no one but you. Each step forward confirms a truth the past could never accept. You outgrew the narrative. They wanted a reaction, but you became resolution. And resolution never looks back to seek applause from the noise it outlasted. The horizon feels different now. It's not about escape, it's about expansion. The further you move, the smaller everything behind you becomes. Faces that once filled your world now fade into silhouettes. The voices that once shaped your doubt dissolve into echoes. Distance reveals proportion, and proportion reveals truth. You see clearly now who contributed and who consumed. You understand that not every connection was meant to last. Some existed only to teach boundaries. You carry those lessons like weapons polished by time. There's no desire to return, no need to prove anything. What's ahead calls louder than what's behind. The world still tests you, still throws reminders, but the mind that has learned not to look back cannot be trapped again. That's the essence of freedom, not the absence of pain, but the refusal to revisit it. They'll catch glimpses of what once was, but never the whole picture again. You'll hover just out of reach, close enough to remind them, far enough to deny them peace. That's the way time rewrites attachment. It turns what was familiar into something unreachable. They'll scroll through old photos, not to remember, but to reimagine. Yet even nostalgia feels foreign now. Every attempt to feel you again only deepens the distance. Because what they miss no longer exists. What they abandoned transformed while they weren't looking. The version of you they could manipulate, explain, or control no longer breathes. What stands in its place is something elevated, untouchable. You don't seek revenge, you've evolved beyond need. You hover like a constellation, visible, real, but no longer within their grasp. They can see what they lost, but not touch it. That is punishment far colder than absence. It's awareness without access. Life will keep placing reflections of you in their path. They'll meet people who speak like you, think like you, even carry your calmness, but none of them will be you. That realization will settle slowly, like frost on glass. They'll reach for comparison, but every attempt will fail because authenticity can't be replicated. The distance between who you were and who you've become will widen each year, and they'll remain frozen in the version of the past they destroyed. You won't have to remind them of what they lost. The world will do it for you. Every act of grace they witness will echo your energy. Every moment of genuine kindness will sting. Because deep down, they'll remember what it felt like when such energy once belonged to them. You'll remain suspended in their story, untouchable yet unforgettable. That's the strange justice of growth. It doesn't scream. It simply outpaces those who tried to contain it. The universe has a cruel way of teaching people value through distance. When they had access to you, they mistook patience for permission. They confused kindness with softness. They thought your silence meant surrender. But distance exposes everything proximity conceals. Once you stepped back, they started to see what presence actually meant. Your calm was not passivity, it was control. Your stillness was not weakness, it was strength withheld. From afar, they finally understand the magnitude of what they mishandled. But by the time clarity arrives, access is gone. That's the irony. They now see your worth in full view, but can never reach it. They'll spend years replaying conversations, rethinking their tone, trying to decode what made you so unshakable. Yet every answer leads to the same truth. You were never meant to be possessed. You were meant to be understood, and they lack the awareness for that. Sometimes they'll convince themselves they've moved on. They'll build new connections, rehearse new smiles, fill the spaces where your presence used to live. For a while, it might even work. But growth leaves a residue. Energy doesn't forget. Every new person will eventually reveal the same lesson. None of them hold the depth you carried. They'll sense the difference, the subtle gravity that once surrounded you. It will bother them without explanation. You'll linger in gestures and silences, in the way they hesitate before trusting again. You won't haunt them out of vengeance. You'll exist like a scent on clothing they can't wash out. It won't hurt constantly, just when life slows down enough for reflection. That's when your image returns, sharper than memory should allow. You became the horizon of their growth, visible, inspiring, unreachable. No matter how far they travel, they'll always feel your shadow following just a step behind. When you step beyond reach, something shifts in power. They lose the illusion of control, and in its place comes reverence. They used to analyze your reactions, predicting how you'd respond, measuring your boundaries. But now, unpredictability has replaced familiarity. They can no longer read you. You've outgrown their understanding. That's what terrifies them most. The realization that silence evolved into authority. You hover just out of reach, not to tease, but to transcend. They can't use the same tricks, because the board changed while they were still strategizing. Your growth rendered their manipulation obsolete. Every time they attempt to speak about you, they sound outdated, like someone quoting a language no longer spoken. You became something they can reference, but not replicate. That's the consequence of trying to control what was never owned. Eventually, what you suppress learns how to exist without you. There will come a day when they see you again, perhaps by chance, perhaps through something digital and detached. You'll look composed, self-contained, untethered. In that moment, they'll feel two things: admiration and loss, because they'll recognize the calm but not the connection. The eyes they once read will now hold a distance that humbles them. They'll want to say something, but the words won't form. Every apology rehearsed in their head will sound too small for the damage done. So they'll settle for silence, hoping you'll read it as understanding. But you won't. You've learned that some silence is not peace, it's consequence. You'll keep walking, not out of pride, but completion. You've already made peace with the ending they still deny. You don't need closure when detachment has become your language. You'll remain out of reach, not because you ran, but because they stayed where growth frightened them. Distance does something poetic to memory. It romanticizes what it can't reclaim. They'll start to rewrite the story, convincing themselves it was timing, misunderstanding, fate. Anything but accountability. That's the comfort delusion offers. It paints the past in softer colors to hide the sharpness of truth. Yet no rewrite can bridge what's gone. They'll still feel the magnetic pull whenever your name surfaces, that small tightening in their chest that says, "I ruined something good." You will hover there, quiet but commanding, the ghost of an opportunity they squandered. Not haunting them, but humbling them. You'll be the story they never finished telling, because the ending exposes too much truth. That's your legacy in their mind, the one that got away not through disappearance, but through evolution. And evolution, once begun, cannot be reversed. The beauty of distance is that it turns the lesson into art. You've become that lesson. You're the reminder that not everything lost is meant to return. They'll try to recreate the energy, to find a version of you in others, but imitation always reveals itself eventually. You remain untouchable because you no longer seek validation and recognition. You've transcended the need to be remembered correctly. They can misunderstand, misquote, misrepresent, but it changes nothing. The truth doesn't need agreement, it just needs time. And time has crowned you untouchable. Their perception no longer shapes your narrative. You exist beyond it, orbiting in a higher rhythm, free from the gravitational pull of their need. You hover not out of cruelty, but mastery. Freedom, after all, is not escape, it's evolution without resentment. Eventually, they'll stop trying to reach you, not because they stopped caring, but because they finally understand they can't. Some lessons can't be learned through apology. They can only be absorbed through absence. That's what your distance taught them. Their growth depends on living without what they once exploited. And so you'll remain, still hovering, a silent constellation in their conscience. Visible enough to inspire, untouchable enough to remind. You became the reminder that grace can be both gift and consequence. That silence, when earned, becomes legacy. You were not lost, you ascended. You didn't drift away. You elevated beyond reach. They'll watch your evolution with a mix of awe and ache, realizing too late that the person they once took for granted now exists in a frequency they'll never access again. They tried to move on, to rebuild the illusion of normalcy, but their peace kept tilting off balance. No matter how far they went, something kept circling back. It wasn't loud nor visible, but it was constant. That was you, an orbit around their conscience, quiet yet gravitational. Every time they started to feel steady, your memory pulled them like the tide pulls at the shore. They'd smile in public, but stillness always betrayed them. Because conscience never sleeps, it only waits. When they thought the world forgot, it reminded them through coincidence. A song that sounded too familiar, a phrase someone repeated the same way you once did. The universe has a habit of looping reminders until guilt learns its lesson. You became that loop, not to punish, but to balance. Energy demands symmetry, and theirs owed you a reckoning they couldn't delay. At first, they mistook the feeling for nostalgia. They told themselves they missed the past, not realizing it was accountability wearing memory's mask. They'd wake up with a weight that words couldn't explain, a quiet unease that clung to the morning. They tried to distract themselves with work, people, plans, anything that kept thoughts busy. But silence has a cruel sense of timing. The moment distractions fade, conscience begins its slow conversation. That's where you live now, not in their memories, but in their self-dialogue. You don't chase them, you revolve naturally, like gravity following physics. You exist as the unspoken reminder that actions have echoes. They can suppress it for hours, even days, but the orbit always completes its cycle. No guilt escapes its return. Every lie they told about you ends up circling back, stripped of disguise, asking the same quiet question. Was it worth it? There's a strange poetry in how guilt behaves. It doesn't scream or demand, it circles. Always at a distance, but never gone. They try to call it paranoia, overthinking, bad dreams. But conscience doesn't need a reason, it only needs memory. It never forgets who gave their best, who stayed kind, who walked away without malice. That awareness follows them everywhere, orbiting without end. When they laugh too freely, something inside whispers restraint. When they speak too proudly, something tugs them back. That pull is you steady and unseen. They can't name it, but they feel it. A faint disquiet that visits every time the world goes quiet. You became a quiet gravity their spirit can't escape. It doesn't punish them. It balances the equation. Energy doesn't vanish when betrayed. It redirects. And you became that redirection, the reminder that every choice creates its own orbit, and theirs just happened to circle around the truth they ran from. Their nights changed first. The day offers distractions, but darkness has no mercy. The mind slows, and conscience begins its rotation. That's when you appear, not as a ghost, but as clarity. In the half-silence before sleep, they replay everything they said and did, trying to rewrite it mentally. But even imagination can't outmaneuver truth. The mind can fabricate excuses, yet the soul knows better. You exist in that gap, the distance between who they pretended to be and who they actually were. They feel it like a pulse. The more they resist it, the closer you come. You don't torment. You simply exist where truth is unavoidable. That's the beauty of your orbit. It doesn't require confrontation, just time. Every rotation of conscience brings them a little closer to the realization they once refused to face. And when it finally settles, they'll call it regret, though it's always been recognition. In public, they seem composed, but there's a flicker that betrays them when certain words surface. Loyalty, forgiveness, integrity. Those words land like echoes from a past they thought was buried. You hover there, invisible but undeniable, circling above their pride. Each new accomplishment feels slightly hollow, because it rests on foundations they know were built dishonestly. Success loses taste when conscience keeps seasoning it with truth. They once believed distance could dissolve memory, but space changes nothing when guilt has learned your name. You became part of their emotional weather, subtle, unpredictable, unavoidable. They can pretend not to see you, but you're woven into their days like sunlight through blinds. Some mornings they almost forget. Other times, a scent or phrase drags the entire weight back. That's how conscience works. It doesn't chase retribution. It enforces balance through gentle reminders that never fade. They've tried to justify what happened. Rationalization is guilt's favorite disguise. They tell themselves that people change, that everyone makes mistakes, that you'd understand now. But understanding doesn't erase energy. It only amplifies it. They still sense the imbalance between what they took and what they gave. You hover at the edge of every conversation about honesty, quietly reminding them that truth was never the problem. It was their courage that failed. That awareness has made them quieter over time. They speak less confidently about others, hesitate before judging, think twice before acting. Without realizing it, your orbit has reshaped their morality. You didn't need to confront them to make them change. Their conscience did the work for you. What used to be arrogance has softened into self-observation. That's how guilt transforms into growth. It's guided not by noise, but by the steady pull of what remains unresolved. Every person carries an orbit like this, the unseen force of their choices. For them, you became the defining one, not through vengeance, but through presence. You taught them the kind of lesson only time can deliver. They learned that avoiding responsibility only deepens the gravity of guilt. The more they resisted reflection, the tighter the orbit became. Until one day, everything started aligning again. The truth, the memory, the silence. That's when remorse finally arrived. Not as an apology, but as understanding. They realized too late that you never sought revenge, you sought peace. And peace requires truth. They see now that your silence was never avoidance. It was mastery. The calm that comes from knowing life always circles back to balance. What was done in shadows returns through conscience, carried by the same energy it tried to escape. Sometimes, they think about reaching out. They imagine crafting a message, something casual yet redemptive, hoping to test if forgiveness still lives somewhere in your silence. But the thought alone carries weight. They hesitate because deep down, they know they don't deserve your calm anymore. You became sacred ground in their mind, a reminder of how much honesty costs and how cheaply they traded it away. So instead, they settle for thought. You orbit their conscience, and that orbit has become prayer. Every act of kindness they perform now, every restraint they show, every lesson they teach, it's all done in quiet repentance. They never say it aloud, but everything good they've become carries your fingerprint. You change them without contact. That's what conscience does. It turns pain into compass, guilt into gravity. There's beauty in that, even if bittersweet. You didn't destroy them, you redirected them. The orbit you created around their conscience became their silent teacher. Over time, guilt softened into humility, and humility birthed awareness. You were never their punishment, you were their mirror. And reflection, once seen, cannot be unseen. They learned the hard way that truth doesn't fade, it orbits. It remains close enough to remind, far enough to forgive. They won't say it, but you've become their measure of integrity, the invisible standard they now live by. Every time they pause before lying, or think twice before betraying, it's you circling back again. You became what conscience was always meant to be, a quiet gravitational force pulling humanity back to decency, one orbit at a time.